Hi there, it's Richard Little from Your Land Partner. I'm joining you once again. We are on a video 56 out of 100. We're in the midst of a short series of videos, 12 on planning, the process, and various other aspects. We'll be getting onto strategy a little bit later in the process. This, for anybody that was watching this live, this is take two. Not quite sure what happened, but we lost the connection. So let's talk about applications, the type of application, and some of the main issues in and around that. It is the paperwork end of things, but actually it might surprise some of you to know that there are in excess of 20 different types of planning consent. So there's lots of different routes. A lot of that we don't get involved with. I've just mentioned a couple of bits really that might be relevant, you might have heard of, etc. Start off permitted development, prior approval. This is for change of use for existing buildings generally, and so we don't get too involved with that because most of our stuff, as you will all well know probably by now, it's new build and mostly residential. This isn't where we're going to learn about permitted development and prior approval. Plenty of other information out there on that, but that's not for today. We have something called householder application, which obviously we're not really looking to do that. That's just obviously something if you're doing it on your own home, or maybe a property that you own. But anyway, permission in principle is probably the one that some of you might have heard of, not really understood what it is. It's for mostly residential development, less than 10 dwellings, mostly residential. So you can have a little bit of commercial in there, so it is okay for mixed schemes, but the majority of the scheme must be for residential. It's exactly what it says. It's permission in principle. So what we're actually saying is, yes, you can build on it, and at a later date, the next stage, so two-staged application, much as our outline and full, which we'll talk about a little bit more. And so you get into the technical stuff in the second stage. So we're not really going to talk too much about permission in principle, but just be aware of it. It might be appropriate for some developments. We've still not used it yet. We still haven't had anything where it's really appropriate for us, and we don't really know that many people that have used it, to be fair. And whether or not it will take off is anybody's guess, I suppose. So before I just talk about outline and full, which are the main two we use and the main two that most people use, I will just mention something else, which is a PPA, which is planning performance agreement. Now this is generally for what we would call major schemes, so larger schemes or more complex schemes, and even complex minor schemes, etc. And this is a project management process, whereby all of the stakeholders, including the local planning authority, the landowners, the developers, etc., all come together and agree certain things in advance, really. So we're going to be agreeing time scales, we're going to be agreeing what resources are required, what actions everybody's going to take, and it's actually quite good. So for those of you that think planning is always chaotic, it doesn't have to be. They're taking a much more commercial approach to some schemes. So we'll agree up front how long it's going to take and pretty much what it's going to cost, etc., etc. So I've just mentioned that for those of you that perhaps are looking at perhaps either complicated smaller schemes or larger schemes, major schemes. But I just want to spend the rest of the video talking about outline application and full application. So we'll start off with outline. Pretty much what it says. It's an outline of what the project might be, what your proposal is. So it's going to consider layout, scale, appearance, access. But with the outline process, you can omit all of those. So you can go for outline with one of those. So scale is one that we see quite a bit. So you may well see an outline consent of residential consent up to 10 houses, 20 houses, whatever the number might be, but it's up to. So what they've actually done, they've had a high level agreement on how many, so the scale, how many there is likely to be. But as I say, you can elect when you actually apply for outline to cover those any of those four main areas, if you like. If you're covering them all, then that sort of then turns into a full application. So you've got your outline on one side, you've got your full on the other, and you've got the ability within the outline to cover as much detail as you want without actually going to full. A number of people would have heard me say before that often outline consent isn't worth the paper it's written on, and that's actually true, because it generally, not generally, that's not true, it can on occasion just really give you an indication, we'll accept some development there, we'll accept something, but you've got all the detail to do, and how long is that going to take? Anyway, what the process is, you submit an outline application. It's cheaper than a full application. Excuse me. And a lot of people go for it, and particularly those that are going to sell sites on, those looking for the planning uplift, sell the sites on, they'll go for the minimum detail. So they'll go for outline, and it's okay, don't worry about the layout, don't worry about the scale, don't worry about the appearance. They like scale a little bit because numbers actually help them, puff up the value, if you like, or what the potential might be. But they don't do much detail, and it's always clear from us when we're looking at something that's either got consent or it's in the pipeline, it's in the application stage, etc. We have a very, very good idea of what their strategy might be, should we say, on this site. Are they just looking to sell it on, or are they looking to build it out? And sometimes you'll get landowners that will spend the absolute minimum, and they'll get it refused to outline. And actually, we look at some of that stuff, and some of that stuff's gold dust, really, because they haven't invested enough money in it in order to actually give themselves the best chance. So some of the consultants that they appoint, it's not always the consultant's fault. It's sometimes their hands are tied purely by budget. If they spend another 10 grand, we've got a couple of more surveys done, we could have given more information, we've got a better chance of getting the consent. But so an outline, it's really a case of, if you want to spend less, that's the route to go. It's establishing, again, in principle, I said about permission in principle, before PIP came out, all we had was outline. So that was what we used to establish permission in principle, if you like. And then the detail comes later. So whatever detail is omitted at the outline application stage is then dealt with at the second stage of this process, which is called reserve matters. And that's when you go back into the planners and you start dealing with the scale, the appearance, the access, etc. The detailed design and things like that. So that's when you start investing quite a lot of money and time. And whatever process you go through, whether it's outline or it's full, it will always take a lot longer than people, well, it certainly always takes longer than what people want it to take. But when you start working out how long it is end to end, it's, very, very rarely can you get anything out within inside 6 months. From the point of view of we're putting it in now and it's going to come out ready to put a spade in the ground and, crack on, get the foundations dug and away you go. So, the timeline, whichever route you go, is quite a lot longer than people would like it to be. So as I say, with outline, slightly lower cost, well, no, quite much lower cost, to be fair, in that first stage of the process, and then you're picking up the cost in the second stage of the process. But you feel more confident because perhaps you've got some consent there. It is worth something. It's not always fair to say it's not worth anything, but it's never worth as much as people want it to be worth either. But so if we just move on to full application, so that's when we're putting more detail in. So we will be covering things like the layout, the scale, the appearance, the access, etc. We will be covering those because it's a full application. So obviously what people avoid doing this for generally is because they have to invest an awful lot more money, in the design, in the surveys, in the reports and everything else in order to prepare all that information to take it forward. And if you refer to previous video when we talk about the pre-app process, part of the pre-app process, or one of the main reasons for the pre-app process, is to do the preparation for the full application. For the outline maybe, but it's all about pushing forward with more detail. So when you start going into the process, we've got a much tighter timeline in terms of how long it's going to take and how confident we might be will be about getting some sort of consent. So full is costing you a lot more money up front, but actually then what actually then happens is you won't have agreed all details. Even if you put most of the details in, they'll come up with a list of conditions which you then have to you've got to satisfy those conditions. Yeah, so that's another application afterwards to actually, and some of those will be pre-commencement conditions, so those you have to apply to discharge those conditions, and there's a cost to that, etc. Each condition or each application depending on where you are. And so again, it's a time thing. So if you've got to have certain things that have got to be discharged before commencement on site, then you've got to allow for that sort of time. The pre-construction sort of period. Other things, other conditions will get discharged as you go through. You can do that as you go through with some. So whichever route, whether it's outline or full, there is always some detail to sort out once you've got that valuable bit of paper that says, congratulations, you've got planning consent. I don't quite say that, but it's how it makes you feel when you get a bit of paper. It comes through email now, comes through and says there's your planning consent. It's great, but we always sort of say, being the cynic that I am particularly, but as a company, if you like, as a family, don't get too excited until you look at what isn't in there. What are the conditions? If it's a full consent, what are the conditions on there? Can we actually even meet some of those conditions? So it's quite possible to get planning consent, whether it be outline or full, that's not deliverable, and that definitely, again, another story for another day. So what I just really want to sort of touch on really in terms of from the planning aspect is obviously there's cost to all of this. So there's different costs. With outline, etc. It's based on the site area. With full, it's based on the units or the size if it's going to be commercial, etc. And all of those costs are they're readily available on the local planning authority's website, so it can be calculated sort of as to what the cost is. But that's just the application fee. As I say, with all of those, with any of those, outline or full, there was normally some follow-up costs as well in respect of reserve matters for outline and discharging conditions in full. Time-wise, to process the applications, so the baseline for outline and full is 8 weeks, but it really depends on sort of certainly larger schemes. 13 weeks tends to be the period that you will expect to get a decision in. But again, this sort of stuff gets picked up in the pre-app process, and to be fair, some authorities are better at that than others, so it's not always as solid as you'd like it to be again. And that process, will they meet those timelines? Will they meet them deadlines? Well, sometimes they do. They absolutely do, and quite often they don't. They might ask you to agree an extension, and sometimes you will, and sometimes you won't. We'll touch on that when we talk about strategy. But what I want to say at this point is, don't just allow 8 weeks or 13 weeks for the application, because give yourself another 4 weeks or even 8 weeks on top of that. Don't make things too tight, particularly if you are if you're putting milestone dates into perhaps deal structures, or you've actually got contractors ready to go, etc. Don't work on those deadlines. Always give yourself a bit of a buffer, or quite a lot of a buffer, in terms of a time contingency, I guess. So just because it says 8 weeks or 13 weeks or whatever it is, other than, as I mentioned before, other than with the planning performance agreements, which are pretty tight, but that planning performance agreements is on bigger schemes, and it might be over 12 months, 18 months or 2 years. So a lot of the schemes that most of us are doing, we've only got one of those at the moment, and that's 18, 21 months, I think, something like that, in terms of how long that's got to run. So as ever, I'm going off on a slight tangent, But the key things really for most people that watch this video is about outline and full, and so understand the cost implications of doing both, but also the time implications of doing both. And I just want to finish off putting a little bit of a, you know, a more of a negative spin probably on the outline, in so much as you know, getting that outline consent for, you know, up to so many units does not mean to say that you will get, if it's up to 8 units, doesn't mean to say you'll get 8 units, and that doesn't really say how big they'll be, and it doesn't tell you whether they'll be detached, terraced or whatever. So our view pretty much always is, you know, even if you go on the outline route, and there's nothing wrong with the outline route, absolutely not, but you need to get a bit of detail, and the key detail to us isn't necessarily the numbers, it's the access. So what you'll find is, if you get outline consent, and it might even say 20 units, it might be very specific, where there's actually perhaps a bit of a layout gone in, and they've you know, half agreed to the layout, if you like, and you know, but the access, so, you know, can you achieve the access even in the first place? So this is why I did sort of, you know, just sort of suggest that sometimes you can get you know, planning consents, outline and full, on sites that aren't deliverable, and generally the one there that stops them is the access. So there is no legal access, but you still got a bit of paper that says you've got planning consent. So, you know, in conclusion, just be very mindful of what application route you take. Talk to your consultants, talk to whoever's working with you, as perhaps as an agent on the planning process side. So, you know, generally, as you well know, would be for us it's internal, but for most people it's via a planning consultant, or, you know, architect's practice that's got, you know, a sufficient resource and expertise, experience in and around planning. You know, be led on what they're saying, but, you know, it's really, really important, as I'm sure most of you know that listen to us from time to time or watch us from time to time, is you should never be consultant led. So you do need to understand a little bit about the process and what the implications are. So yeah, if it goes as per normal, I probably mess with a few heads in terms of this, and probably confused a few people, and I might want to watch it again and make some notes, and if they've ever got any questions, stick it in the Facebook or the YouTube or whatever on the threads, and we will pick them up. But you know, so you don't have to be in the dark. So this has been Richard Little, been talking about planning applications, in particular outline and full, and we will be seeing you again quite likely tomorrow. So take care.